Hello fellas cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm continuing on my horror icon series and focusing on Jason Voorhees. So today I'll be looking at Friday the 13th Part 2. This was written and directed by Steve Miner and came out in 1981, so a year after the release of the first film. The film takes place 5 years after the events of the original film. And we're not actually in Camp Crystal Lake anymore. We're sort of moved out of that in a different era. And it's about a whole new group of teenagers sort of learning to be counsellors. But there's a huge group this time compared to the first film. And I just felt like I didn't really connect with any of the characters. I didn't find any of them that really well defined or that interesting, except for Amy Steele's character Ginny, who was sort of becomes the hero of the piece ultimately. Her performance here is kind of solid, and she's kind of an interesting character. She has a really good moment in the film where she starts to talk about Jason and what happened and what transpired, and that she sort of felt for him a little bit. And obviously the last 15-20 minutes of the film is the really great parts of it, where Jason starts to kill them off one by one and she has to sort of come up against him to become the ultimate hero, and I really like that element. But the rest of the film just sort of, I didn't find that interesting. The death scenes were kind of elaborate and trying something a bit different, and they still had the great prosthetics work, where a guy gets a machete in the face in a wheelchair and he falls downstairs, and another guy gets his throat slit, and they keep that aspect up that they just began in the previous film. And the way that they disguise the killer in this film is really just focus on his feet. We see these pair of boots and they walk around and we see them go from place to place, and there's an opening sequence which sort of relates back to Alice from the first film, and she's living, she's in this little town, she's living in an apartment, and when we meet her she's sort of having all these really dark and twisted dreams about what transpired for her in the events of the first film. And we sort of get a whole rundown of the previous movie, like it's sort of doing a TV series thing where it goes previously on Friday the 13th. And it shows you all the end sequence of that particular film. I just felt that they didn't need to do this. They didn't need to go into too much detail because you already know the first film, what happened in it. They could have had little bits of it. I just thought this was a little much. But the sequence there is quite interesting. We see this kid playing in the water. Then this guy walks across. We follow his feet into the house, and she has all this sort of flashback stuff. And she's only taken out and killed with a screwdriver. But what makes this sequence kind of feel odd is, how could this be Jason Voorhees? How could he have travelled so far in order to kill her? It just didn't quite make sense. And a lot of people are saying they were killed by somebody else. And that would make more sense to me, because it just felt out of place, this scene, in the mythology of, Jason Voorhees. With the returning characters in this film, it was like they were cleaning house, taking them all out and sort of saying, we've finished with this film and now we're moving on to something else. And that's sort of what this film felt like. It was like getting rid of the old and bringing in the new. All the teens just sort of came, lumped together. It felt a bit by the numbers, and I know this was sort of early days of the slasher genre, so it was sort of, looking at it now, you can sort of think, oh well, it isn't as inventive, original, unique as what we see in the later films, but it's because it's the beginning and we're seeing them do something that hadn't really been done before, except for the previous film. But I just felt they had too many characters. They couldn't define them well enough. There was too much going on, and I think it's a real departure from the first film, where the teens weren't brilliant in that film, but they were defined enough, and there was only a small amount of them, and they each got a moment in that film to really show who they were and interact with each other before they were ultimately killed off. This film doesn't really have too much of that. There are moments of it, but it just feels different, and I don't know if I like that aspect to it. But besides Ginny, the best thing ultimately, and why I'm doing these videos, was Jason Voorhees. I loved the reveal of him, was fantastic. Like, he'd just killed someone, he's in a bed, and this girl comes to investigate, and he ultimately sits up. And he's got this sort of pillowcase or Hessian bag over his face with an eye hole cut out. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a great reveal and great way to introduce Jason Voorhees as the killer in this, taking up the mantle of what his mother started in the first film, and sort of paying back those people he felt responsible for the death of his mother. And I thought this was a really great aspect. And when he comes on screen, you're sort of terrified by him, because it's the idea he's got this mask on his face, this pillowcase, and it's hiding his disfigurement underneath it. But you're not quite sure what he looks like, and it's kind of terrifying in that regard. And he's kind of a relentless killer in this film. He just keeps going and going, and something we would see later in the film. And this is before he got the hockey mask. So the hockey mask didn't openly appear until the next film. But it's in the early days, and there's a story behind it that there was some strange man running around with a pillowcase over his head killing people. So it was like they were sort of relating that, what was happening in that film, to reality, and I kind of like that. But he had some really great moments in it. It didn't sort of evolve the character. It didn't have moments where he's doing something, you know, by himself away from everyone. But he did have a moment in the film where towards the end of the movie, everyone's been killed off and Ginny's trying to survive, and she ends up in this little makeshift hut that he seemed to have built and been living in for the last 5 years. And there's his mother's head in there, you know, sort of like an altar with these candles around it. But when she ultimately gets there, she puts on his mother's jumper and pretends to be him, and he sort of gets confused, and he has visions of his mother talking to him, and Betsy Palmer returns to play Mrs. Voorhees once again, which is great. But it's sort of like he has a really great moment there. And when you hear Ginny talking about him earlier in the film, you really feel for him a little bit. Like, he saw his mother die, and now what does he do? And he's sort of trying to live and be who he is, but without his mother he feels lost, and he's acting out. I know that sort of kind of sounds silly. It makes him sound like some sort of child having a tantrum, but that's sort of what it feels like. And that's the sort of moment he has. But the last, like I said, the last 15, 20 minutes is really where the film lifts up and becomes the Friday the 13th I really wanted it to be. And the kills get more elaborate and more extreme, and we get to see him in action, which I really love. Has a really great ending too. That's sort of reminiscent of the first film where Jason jumps out of the water and attacks Alice. The same sort of similar thing happens to Ginny, and she gets attacked in a really great way, and we finally get to see what Jason Voorhees looks like without that bag over his head. And it's just shocking and terrifying. It's just a brilliant way to do it. And it sort of sets up that there could be more to come, and ultimately, finally, Jason Voorhees has become the killer of the Friday the 13th series, which I really loved. He was fantastic. But like I said, the film wasn't as good as I expected it to be. I felt a bit disappointed in it. And there weren't any real defining characters except for Ginny. And the love interest survives, which doesn't usually happen in these films. And because in the last film, Alice was the only one to survive. So there's, you know, it looks at the love interest for our female character survives as well. There's some really great music in this film. It feels a lot like Psycho, which is another film about a man whose mother's dead, dealing with the issues and sort of taking up the mantle and sort of becoming a bit crazed by what has transpired in regards to his particular mother. The cinematography is fine, like it doesn't do anything special, unique. There's a bit of slow motion in there, and like I said, the use of following the feet was a kind of an interesting thing, and there's some shots of doing the POV, which carries on from what Mrs. Voorhees was doing and how they were portraying her in the previous film, which I really liked. But there's nothing real special here about the cinematography. Overall, if you're a fan of the Friday the 13th series, this is definitely worth checking out. It isn't the best of the series, but it is moving the story along and finally showing us Jason Voorhees as the killer we ultimately know in this particular series. It's worth checking out, but it isn't brilliant. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you're enjoying this series because I'm enjoying doing them. And the next film I'll be looking at is obviously part 3, which at one point was filmed in 3D. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe in the bottom. Follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.